Should they stay or should they go? A new report warns nation building in Afghanistan could fall apart if foreign troops leave too soon. Has the US been winning Afghan hearts and minds, or is it cash down the drain? This is Inside Story. Hello, warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Afghanistan risks falling into ruin if foreign troops leave in 2014. That's the conclusion of a new report which says the United States needs to overhaul its multi-billion-dollar package of nation-building aid. The report was compiled over 2 years by Democrats on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It says the U.S. stabilization programs in Afghanistan have had limited success, despite about $19 billion in foreign aid over 10 years. And it comes as the United States reaches a major crossroads in its Afghanistan policy. American troops will begin the first stage of a phased troop withdrawal from the country next month. President Barack Obama has to decide how many of them go home and how soon. Well, let's take a closer look then at the main points of this report on aid to Afghanistan. The report finds that the State Department and USAID are spending $320 million a month on foreign aid, 80% of which is focused in the south and east, leaving only 20% for the rest of the country. The report is concerned about misspent foreign aid, which can result in corruption, alter markets and undercut the ability of the Kabul government to control its resources. And Afghans who are paid inflated salaries are thought to have created a culture of aid dependency. It warned that Afghanistan could slide into a depression because the foreign military and development spending currently contributes to 97% of the country's gross domestic product. And the report goes on to offer a number of recommendations. First, the U.S. administration and Congress should work together on a multi-year authorization on civilian assistance strategy for Afghanistan. Second, the administration should also continue to assess the impact of stabilization programs in Afghanistan and reallocate funds. And finally, donors should not implement projects if Afghans cannot sustain them. Well, joining us now to talk more about this are our three guests in Copenhagen. Anders Fanger, he's a former country director of the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. It's an NGO dedicated to rebuilding Afghanistan. In Washington, D.C., Christopher Preble, a director of foreign policy at the Cato Institute. And in Kabul, Hekmat Karzai, director of the Center for Conflict and Peace Studies in Kabul. Gentlemen, welcome to all three of you to the program. Hekmat Karzai in Kabul, if I could start with you. Is nation building working in Afghanistan?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I do not really agree with the notion of nation building. Afghanistan has been a nation. I think it's the state building that I think we really need to address. In certain areas, I think we've had success, particularly I think when you look at the army, when you look at a few other institutions. But in other areas, unfortunately, we have not done as well as we could have. So in a sense, we've had a mix results out of this entire experience in Afghanistan.
Christopher Preble in Washington, it's fair to say that there's nothing that's particularly new in many of the conclusions of this report, but is it apparent that the US is throwing money at the problem and really not doing enough to focus and monitor its aid efforts?
Well, I don't think it's just a question of the way it's being managed. Look, most nation building or state building, if you will, that's probably a more accurate term, most state building missions fail. This is the documented proof. It's been documented for some time. And even those few that have succeeded require an extraordinary amount of effort and time and money. And so I think that people who in the United States believe that this could be done easily, could be done reasonably quickly, have been proved wrong yet again, and I think this report will add further fuel to the fire for those of us who have been saying that the mission does not align well with U.S. strategic objectives in the region.
Anders Fanger in Copenhagen, what do you make of the conclusions of this report? Is it time to get out?
Yeah, well, I think they already decided that they are getting out, so that's nothing new there either. The report itself is stating what's already been stated in a lot of research and other reports which have been published over the years. And so that's nothing new either. But I think the point here is that if you look at, say, strategy from the United States and from the international community when it comes to state building, that there have been opposing strategies, and that's the fundamental failure in what. You have one military strategy and you have had one civilian strategy which actually have been working against each other, and that has been the main problem when it comes to state building in Afghanistan.
So what's the solution then as far as getting them to work with each other more?
Yeah, well, you have to ask the people in the US administration and in governments in other Western countries who have been dealing with these things. But, I mean, to be more explicit, what has happened there is that the military has gone in, and their main strategy has been to eliminate Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And they have, in pursuing that objective, they have allied themselves with quite a lot of bad elements in Afghan society. And these elements, which are then given power positions by the through American money, American weapons, American support. These elements, they are not interested in a functioning state. And at the same time, it is an absolute condition for the counterinsurgency strategy to work. It is to have a functioning state. If you don't have a functioning state, counterinsurgency won't work.
Hekmat Karzai.
Can I step in here?
Yeah, go ahead, Christopher Preble.
Sorry, just very quickly, the previous guest in Copenhagen referred to the counterinsurgency field manual, which the military, the Army and Marine Corps use in Afghanistan and places like it. And the manual emphasizes the need to restrain the use of force, to expose troops to additional risk in the interest of minimizing civilian casualties. This is military doctrine, U.S. military doctrine. The problem is that the political structure that you are trying to build is completely incapable of sustaining in any reasonable time period the level of support that we in the West expect of it. So I don't think it's entirely fair to blame this on the U.S. military strategy. The military strategy is quite clear, but what is not clear is the capacity of the Afghan state to actually operate as the doctrine stipulates.
Hekmat Karzai in Kabul, isn't part of the problem, as Mr. Fanger in Copenhagen alluded to here, the rampant corruption that is present in your country, and that is really what's hampering many of the efforts at state building in Afghanistan?
Look, it's always very easy to make the Afghans the scapegoat for all of the flaws and for all of the mishaps that are taking place in Afghanistan, but there is a very logical explanation for a lot of these things. First, if we look at development in Afghanistan, it has never really been about demand-driven. It has never been to the wishes of Afghans. It's always been what these various capitals found attractive, and what these capitals found that this is what our constituency is interested in. That's one. Second, we never understood the politics of development in Afghanistan. The politics of development is what are the Afghans really in need of, and how can we empower Afghans to take the ownership of these projects. So those are the two very serious challenges. So we can obviously blame the Afghan capacity, but at the same time, what have we done to build the Afghan capacity? In particularly, we have built international parallel structures, the international community, which are taking the same resources, the same manpower from the Afghan infrastructure. While the international community pays 10 times the salaries to these Afghans and international experts, the Afghan civil servants make $70 to $100 a month. So it's very easy to blame the Afghans, but let us look at what has been happening for the past 10 years and then try to put the blame accordingly.
Anders Fanger in Copenhagen. Yeah, go ahead if you want to respond to that.
Yes. No, I agree with Hekmat Karzai when he is saying that all the blame should not be put on the Afghans, and that's actually not what I did. I actually blamed the international assistance effort and the international military effort in Afghanistan, not so much as I'm blaming the Afghans, although I think that the Afghans also has a part in it, because of course they have grabbed opportunities. So, I mean, many people would grab opportunity if they are sailing by, and it's a lot of money. So that's not very peculiar. But I think the thing here is, if we look more on say, strategic, on a more principal level of this, I'm coming back to the fact that the international community, led by the United States, have not had a comprehensive strategy for the build-up of an Afghan state. Instead, they have different strategies. One military, to put it simple, one military and one development, state-building strategy. And these have been opposing each other. Because what I'm saying is that and I'm actually repeating here, that what the military has been doing is that they have allied themselves with a lot of bad people in Afghan society who have used their power position to abuse people, for power abuse and these things, and to enrich themselves. And this is, of course, a fault which is lying both on the American military side and the certain Afghan side and so on. But nevertheless, these people who then are, whether they are drug lords or whether they are other bad people who are gaining a lot of a chaotic situation, they are not interested in a functioning state, and that's the point.
And one of the figures that jumped out at me, and we saw it in our graphic there earlier, is this 97% figure, that 97% of Afghanistan's gross domestic product depends on some form of foreign assistance. Isn't that part of the problem here, is that there's too much dependency on this foreign aid, and that Afghanistan is in no position to basically fend for itself when that foreign assistance is gone? And if that's the case, then who is mainly responsible for this? Anders Fange in Copenhagen?
Yeah, well, I just wondered if the question came to me. Yes. No, I mean, of course, it's on both sides there too, but I mean, the main mistakes, I think, have been on that one has pushed a very badly coordinated assistance effort from the beginning. I mean, you have a lot of stories on this, like 4 consultancy teams working with a Western consultancy team, sitting in the same ministry, working with the same thing, and they don't know about each other. So there are lots of stories like this. And what I'm saying is, badly coordinated, no comprehensive, unified strategy, but different countries have been coming with their own mandates, with their own ideas, and just as Karzai is saying, that they have not been listening to the Afghans in a proper manner, and consequently done things which has been in line with Afghan wishes and Afghan objectives. This has not been done. They have been going by their own mandates and their own ideas, and then it has ended up in pretty much a mess.
All right, I want to talk a bit more about the military aspect of this now. And there's, of course, been a debate in the White House, the Pentagon and the State Department on whether to start with a significant drawdown of troops or just a minor one. Now, the Afghan security force now stands at around 280,000 personnel and is expected to meet that target of 300,000 by year's end. But the Pentagon is arguing that at least 400,000 Afghan forces are needed to secure the country. Here's what the U.S. Defense Secretary had to say.
We will continue to train, equip, and support Afghan security forces and do what we can to help the government improve the lives of its citizens. In short, there will be no rush to the exits.
So the U.S. Defense Secretary there essentially saying our commitment is to the conditions on the ground and not an artificial timetable. But we should, of course, point out that he is going to be leaving his post as Defense Secretary at the end of this month. And Christopher Preble in Washington, unlike his boss in the White House, he has the luxury of not having to worry about getting re-elected next year. So President Obama has a big decision to make here in terms of how many troops to withdraw and according to what timetable, especially given the fact that the appetite for this war back home in the U.S. is fallen away pretty much.
Yes, that's right. About 73% of the American people believe that the withdrawal should begin this year and should proceed at least as fast as the timetable that's been set forth. I think we need to establish some context. First of all, when Secretary Gates says we're rushing to the exits, we have to remember that there have been U.S. troops in Afghanistan since October of 2001, first. Number two, there are 3 times as many American troops in Afghanistan as when Barack Obama took office. So even if President Obama were to reduce the presence there by 1/3, which I haven't heard anyone proposing in the next year, there would still be more troops in Afghanistan than when he took office. The third point really comes back to a question of what are these troops doing? I take the criticisms of of our guests in Kabul and in Copenhagen quite well. But you do not send development personnel into environments that are insecure. The purpose of the military is to ensure that unarmed civilians who are assisting in reconstruction projects are not gunned down in their beds. And that's the challenge in a place like Afghanistan, or frankly, anywhere else where nation building is proposed. That is why the military instrument is absolutely essential. I think it is most often unwise to invest these kinds of resources in places like Afghanistan when a much more targeted operation can advance American security interests. That's the priority here in Washington, and that's the discussion, that is the nature of the debate that we're having right now here.
And Christopher Preble, as far as the nature of this debate, I mean, the politicians are saying it's time for a proper exit strategy. The military commanders on the ground are saying, no, let's slow down, this needs more time. Are we seeing a real rift here between the two then?
I think that there is always the concern on the part of military officers who have invested, especially military officers, senior officers, who have invested so much time and effort into a mission. But at the end of the day, in the United States, the military takes orders from the civilians. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it always will be. If the President of the United States determines that the military mission should be drawn to a close, it will be.
Hekmat Karzai in Kabul, what's your view on this as far as the timetable of troops withdrawing from Afghanistan? Would you prefer to see a very slow, phased withdrawal?
Before I address this question, I want to make one particular point, which is that if we look at aid and if we look at development throughout the world, there hasn't been any successful case where aid has been responsible for a country to stand on its own. And this is why many Afghans have been saying that we have to move away from aid dependence to economic development. But sadly, that has not been taking place. Now, to the discourse on what seems to happen on the troop level. I think Afghans have been very confused, particularly when they hear several dates. I mean, we started to hear 2011 as a withdrawal date, and then there's the transition 2014 date, and then, of course, there's the 2020 date that some experts are throwing out there. But at the same time, one thing is for certain, that Afghans would like to see a modest withdrawal, and at the same time, they would like to see a very serious emphasis towards a political settlement rather than a very serious shift towards military adjustments. What we want to really focus in particularly is moving towards discussion and reconciliation in this context.
And do you think that will be forthcoming at some point in the future, Hekmat Karzai?
I think at this stage there are much better circumstances now than what we had at least a year ago or 6 months ago. In the first instance that we had very serious difficulty with the international community, who did not really see the prospects of reconciliation. By reconciliation, what I mean is actually discussing and negotiating with the leadership of the Taliban, with the leadership of the various different groups. Now we have come to a consensus. Now we have come to an agreement that you cannot just have reintegration where you bring in foot soldiers, where you bring in field commanders. You really need to engage with the leadership. And now I think we are in a consensus with our international partners on this.
Anders Fanger, there is also the view that's been said, if you're looking at this from the point of view of the Taliban insurgency, flagging up this exit strategy with withdrawal dates and troop numbers and so on, doesn't that risk telegraphing the whole thing to the Taliban, so that from their point of view, they'll be thinking it simply encourages them to just wait this out, wait out the foreign troops until they leave, and then they can get back in there?
No, truly, that's definitely one of the factors which would influence any possible, say, more developed talks or even peace negotiations, and so that the Taliban, of course, if they know that the foreign troops are leaving, then I mean, if I was a Taliban, I would possibly talk about peace negotiations in order to get the troops out a little bit faster. But I wouldn't be serious. I would take it as a tactical thing and still keep my strategic objective. I think in the discussion here that we somehow is missing a little bit of the main point. And the main point, I mean, of course, it's evident it's that a lot of people, they have opinions. Gates have opinions, Petraeus, Pentagon, everybody, and politicians, Kerry and others, everybody have opinions. Afghan politicians, President Karzai and others, and a lot, of course. as Hekmat Karzai pointed out, not the least the Afghan people, they have opinions about this. But if we look at what has been officially decided, then we have to go back to last year, and that's the Lisbon and the Kabul conference last summer. And there it was clearly decided that by 2014 the Afghan army and police will have taken over the security responsibility from the international forces in 2014. And my question is whether those decisions, whether they were based on a solid analysis, on a solid expectation that the Afghan army and police will actually be prepared, be ready to take over the security responsibility by 2014, or if it is simply a way for Western forces, international forces, US forces, to get out and then to talk about transition as a way of face-saving method, but actually everybody knows that they are leaving, and then one has to spin a picture which shows that the Afghan army and police, they will be prepared to take over.
All right,
and I'm in favor. Yeah, I'm in favor of the latter there.
Let's put that question to our man in Washington, Christopher Preble. Were these decisions based on a genuine assessment of the conditions on the ground, or were they just trying to meet targets so they could talk about a transition?
I'm fascinated by this discussion. I mean, the United States sets out goals, and we stipulate to our partners, both in Afghanistan and Western governments, that we are not going to remain in Afghanistan in large numbers indefinitely. This is important. And so your question about signaling to the Taliban that we're going to leave, it's not like they learned about this yesterday or last week with the release of this report today. They knew about this, but so did the Afghan partners, those in the security and government that we want to work with. They also knew that they could not remain dependent upon the United States indefinitely. And how have they responded to that? They appear to believe, because there have been some mixed signals sent here in Washington, they appear to believe that the United States wasn't actually serious about withdrawing from Afghanistan, that we did intend to stay there indefinitely, and that removes the incentive for them to build up their own government, to reconcile a political process which the United States cannot impose on the Afghan people, should not impose on the Afghan people. That's a process that has to occur there, not here in Washington. So I think it's absurd to argue that we are signaling to the Taliban our lack of resolve. Again, we've been here for 10 years, and we're going to be there at least another 5. Is that not enough time? It seems to me that it is.
Hekmat Karzai, your view on this?
I think.
Yeah, let me say a few things. That no country wants to be dependent on foreign forces, and particularly Afghans, which are unbelievably, in terms of sovereignty, in terms of their own independence, very headstrong when it comes to these areas. So obviously, that thesis is put to rest, that we want to stay independent for significant amount of time. That's one thing. But particularly, Afghans understand that there are 3 very significant issues that needs to be looked into context, and they needs to be worked on. The first is the reconciliation that I think we briefly touched upon, and I think there's progress that is being made on that. The second component really is transition, and this is the 2014 date that has started to loom on our heads. But particularly, one of the things that we Afghans are also starting to raise in this context, that it's not just about military, it's also about governance, it's also about basic delivery. The third component that we are talking about now also is not only regional cooperation, but partnership with the international community. I mean, Afghanistan now, in terms of its relationship vis-a-vis Pakistan and vis-a-vis Iran, in terms of there have been some progress that have been made in this regard. But now there needs to be further work done on that, and I think the international community can play a very serious role on that. So just taking into context of this withdrawal of, maybe 5,000 to 10,000, that is not really the irrelevant point.
That is going to have to be the last word. We are unfortunately going to have to leave it there. We are out of time. I want to thank all 3 of our guests for taking part in the discussion. Anders Fanger in Copenhagen, Christopher Preble in Washington, and Hekmat Karzai in Kabul. Many thanks for your time. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your suggestions for taking part of the conversation. You can email them to us anytime at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.